At the moment his teeth pierced another woman's neck, the Alpha King went blind. The marking ceremony was meant to seal his political alliance, to crown a Luna of convenience. But as the bond falsely snapped into place, a searing white heat exploded behind his eyes. The ancient magic governing true mates did not negotiate. It delivered instant, brutal justice. And as his world faded to milky silence, he realized one horrifying truth. He had marked the wrong woman. This is the irreversible law of the fated mate bond, a sacred force that governs the werewolf world. To deny it is to defy the very magic that grants their power. But why did the most powerful alpha in a generation make such a catastrophic mistake? And why did the woman he was destined for, the true Luna standing in the shadows, choose to say absolutely nothing as he sealed his own fate? To understand the collapse, you must first understand the kingdom. For over a century, the Obsidian Mountain Pack ruled the Northern Territories with unchallenged strength. Their Alpha King, Thuron Blackwood, inherited not just a throne but a legacy of absolute dominance. His rule was modern, strategic, and financially impregnable. But ancient magic cares nothing for stock portfolios or border treaties. It waits for one moment of human error. And in this world, that error is choosing politics over destiny. The pressure on Thuron was immense. He was 42, a king without a queen, and his council of elders grew more impatient with each full moon. A stable alliance with the coastal Silver Fang Pack would secure the western trade routes and silence the traditionalists who whispered that his solo rule was weakening their mystical connection to the land. The proposed union was with Lady Seraphina, the Silver Fang Alpha's daughter. She was 26, flawlessly beautiful, trained in diplomacy, and her bloodline was pure aristocracy. She was, by every political metric, the perfect choice. But the mate bond is not a metric. It is a seismic event. And for Thuron, that earthquake was named Ilara. She was not in the royal lineage. She worked in the Pack archives, a keeper of histories and forgotten lore. At 22, she was quiet, observant, and possessed an intuitive connection to the old magic that the politicking elites had long since dismissed as fairy tales. Their first meeting was not in a ballroom, but in a dusty corridor of the library. Thuron, seeking a precedent for a trade dispute, found Ilara already pulling the relevant scrolls, as if she'd been expecting him. The air between them didn't just shift, it crackled. For Thuron, it was the scent of parchment, night-blooming jasmine, and a deep, grounding earth. For Ilara, it was the smell of ozone after a storm, aged whiskey and iron. Their wolves recognized each other instantly. A true mate bond snapped into place with the force of a thunderclap. In that silent, book-lined hallway, the most powerful alpha in generations was rendered speechless, and the quiet archivist saw the entire future flash in his gold-flecked eyes. But this is where the first fatal compromise was made. Thuron, terrified of the unpredictable power of a true bond and shackled by the weight of his crown, asked her for silence. He swore the bond changed nothing about his duty, but begged her for time to manage the political fallout of rejecting the Silver Fang alliance. Ilara, isolated and with no powerful family to advocate for her, agreed. This was the first crack in the foundation. For 3 months, they existed in a stolen, secret world. Brief touches in hidden corners, conversations layered with double meaning in public, a connection that thrummed beneath the surface of every council meeting. Thuron convinced himself he could have both. He could placate his council with the strategic marriage and keep his true mate as a hidden queen. He believed his will could bend the universe's oldest law. Meanwhile, Ilara watched Lady Seraphina arrive at the fortress. She watched the preparations for the lunar marking ceremony, a ritual not of love, but of treaty. The public celebration was a masterpiece of propaganda. Every pack member was given a silver ribbon to wave. The great hall was draped in the interwoven colors of Obsidian Mountain and Silver Fang. The narrative was cemented. This was the union that would usher in a new golden age. Ilara received no ribbon. She was instructed to help catalog the ceremonial artifacts, a cruel twist of fate that placed her in the background of her own tragedy. The night before the ceremony, Thuron found her in the archives. The bond between them was a live wire, painful and yearning. He spoke of duty. She spoke of a prophecy she'd unearthed in a forbidden text, a warning about a king who would be cursed to see only the darkness he chose. He dismissed it as an old superstition. His mind was on tomorrow's logistics, on the speech he had to give, on the alliance he had to secure. He looked at Ilara, his true mate, and saw a complication. He looked at Seraphina and saw a solution. The stage was now set for a sacred farce. The marking ceremony is not just a bite. It is a magical vow, channeled through the Alpha's cananes, that calls upon the ancient forces to witness and bless a union. To perform it without a true bond is considered a profound act of spiritual fraud. As the sun set on the day of the ceremony, Ilara stood at her assigned post near the back pillars. She wore the simple grey dress of a scholar. Seraphina, radiant in gold silk, processed down the aisle. Thuron stood at the altar, his face a mask of regal composure. But his eyes, for a fleeting second, found Ilara in the crowd. In that look she saw it all, his fear, his resignation, and a desperate, silent apology. It was in that moment she made her choice. She would not scream, she would not protest. She would let the ancient magic, the force he had so arrogantly decided to cheat, deliver its own verdict. The High Elder began the incantation. The air grew heavy. Thuron took Seraphina's hand, his grip tight. He bent his head toward her neck, his cananes elongating. The entire kingdom held its breath. Ilara closed her eyes, not in pain, but in focus. She opened them just as his teeth sank into the wrong woman's skin, and she said nothing. The scream that tore through the great hall was not Seraphina's, it was Thuron's. A raw, guttural sound of pure, bewildered agony as the white heat behind his eyes dissolved the world into a featureless, milky void. He stumbled back from Seraphina, his hands clawing at his own face. The marking was incomplete. The magical channel had opened, but with no true bond to flow through, the ancient energy had reversed course, flooding back into him with the violence of a dam break. The curse of the prophecy was not metaphorical. In his attempt to see only a political solution, he had literally blinded himself. Chaos erupted. Seraphina clutched her neck, the shallow bite mark stinging but unsealed. There was no lunar bond. Instead of a union, she felt only a cold, empty void and the splash of her supposed mate's blood as he vomited onto the marble floor. "What is this?" roared Alistair, the Silver Fang Alpha, surging to his feet. "This is an insult. A mockery of our alliance." The Obsidian Council elders swarmed the dais, their faces masks of terror. The kingdom's stability had vaporized in 6 seconds, but amidst the panic, one person remained perfectly still. Ilara. She watched the tendrils of corrupted magic, visible only to her trained eye, snaking around Thuron like black smoke. This was the darkness he had chosen, and from her silent, shadowed pillar, she began to walk, not toward the chaos, but away from it. She moved with a purpose no one else could fathom, slipping through a servant's door behind a tapestry. Her heart hammered, not with fear, but with a terrifying, focused clarity. The archives held the answer to what happened next, but she was not the only one with a plan. In the blinding void, Thuron's other senses sharpened to a painful degree. He could smell the ozone of backfed magic, the coppery tang of his own blood, the cloying perfume of Seraphina's shock. And beneath it all, fatting like a ghost through the panicked crowd, the unmistakable scent of jasmine and earth. His mate, his true mate, was leaving. "Ilara," he bellowed, the name ripping from his throat. The council froze. Seraphina's tears stopped. The name of the archive's keeper echoed in the sudden, chilling silence. The secret was out. In his agony, Thuron had confessed everything. The political calculus of the last 3 months imploded instantly. Alistair of Silver Fang turned a murderous shade of purple. A asterisk servant asterisk. Your true mate is a asterisk servant asterisk, and you dared to mark my daughter. The scandal was now a diplomatic act of war. Thuron, helpless and disoriented, was grabbed by his beater and head physician. They hauled him toward the private quarters, his roars of protest fading down the corridor. The ceremony was over. The alliance was dead, but the supernatural consequence was just beginning. The blindness was not a static condition. It pulsed. With every throb of pain, fragmented, nightmarish visions flashed in Thuron's white sight. Visions of Ilara reading the prophecy, visions of her silent, knowing face in the crowd, visions of a path he could have taken, now forever closed. The curse was not just taking his sight, it was forcing him to watch the life he had rejected on a loop. Meanwhile, Ilara reached the lower archives. She went not to the public shelves, but to a rusted grate in the floor, a forgotten entrance to the catacombs beneath the fortress. This was her real work. While cataloging histories for the council, she had been mapping the old magic's ley lines that converged beneath Obsidian Mountain. The corruption from the false marking would seep into these lines, poisoning the pack's connection to their land. She had maybe 48 hours before the sickness spread. Upstairs, the power struggle commenced in earnest. With Thuron incapacitated, his beater Kale assumed temporary command. Kale was a warrior, not a politician. His first order was to lock down the fortress. No one in, no one out. This included the furious Silver Fang delegation. Alistair took this as an act of hostility, which it was. The second order was to find Ilara. Kale, loyal to Thuron but oblivious to the mate bond's nuances, saw her as a security risk, a loose end who might have bewitched the king. The hunt for the archivist began, not as a search for a queen, but as a pursuit of a fugitive. Ilara could hear the boots of enforcers on the stone floors above. She lit a small witchlight, its glow revealing the damp, ancient tunnels. She was not running away. She was running toward the source. The central Lee Line nexus was deep below the throne room itself. If she could reach it, she could potentially contain the magical feedback, sparing the pack the worst of the sickness. But to do that, she had to bypass the king's own guards. Back in the royal chambers, Thuron's physical world had shrunk to sound and touch. The physician was useless. This was no physical injury. The pack's mystic, an old wolf named Morwen, was summoned. She laid her gnarled hands on Thuron's temples and recoiled. "You have invoked the Bonsunder's curse," she whispered, her voice full of dread. "The magic is eating you from the inside, my king. It will not stop with your eyes. It will take your wolf's sense of smell next, then its hearing, until your beast is entombed in a silent, dark shell within you, a living death." Thuron's blood ran cold. "How do I stop it?" Morwen hesitated. "The texts say only a genuine mate bond can absorb and neutralize the corrupted energy. A true marking, performed with perfect intent, can heal the channel." Thuron's hope surged. "Ilara, bring her to me." Morwen shook her head, a gesture he couldn't see but could hear in the rustle of her robes. "It is not that simple. The bond must be accepted freely. You shattered her trust publicly. You must offer the marking not as a king, but as a supplicant, and she must be willing to bind her soul to a blind man whose kingdom is now on the brink of war." The scale of his folly crashed down on him. He had not just lost his sight, he had lost all his leverage. At that moment Kale entered, his armor clinking. "We cannot find the girl, my king. She has vanished from the upper levels. We believe she may be hiding in the lower archives or the old tunnels." A new, more terrifying thought entered Thuron's mind. What if she wasn't hiding? What if she was doing something else? He remembered her warning about the prophecy. She had known, she had always known. "Stop searching," Thuron commanded, his voice hoarse. "She is not a threat. She is trying to save us." "Let her work," Kale was stunned. "My king, with respect, we are at the edge of chaos. The Silver Fangs are demanding reparations. The pack is terrified. We need to present a strong, unified front. Harboring a servant you publicly declared as your mate, it makes us look weak and deceitful." The political machine, the very machine Thuron had fed for years, was now turning against his only chance of salvation. Down in the catacombs, Ilara reached the nexus. It was a cavern where three glowing streams of silvery energy converged in a pool of liquid light. But now, black tendrils, the visual manifestation of the corrupted marking, were fouling the pool like ink in water. She could feel the wrongness in the air. The pack's magic was here, and it was sick. She began the arduous process of containment, using techniques from forgotten grimoires, drawing purification sigils in the dust with her finger. It was a race against time. Each sigil glowed blue and pushed back the darkness an inch, but the corruption was spreading faster. She realized with dawning horror that she couldn't do this alone. The feedback loop was tied to Thuron. To heal the land, she would eventually have to heal the king, and to heal the king, he would have to see the truth he had been so blind to. The consequences began to manifest. By midnight, wolves throughout the fortress reported a dulling of their senses. Omegas lost their connection to the pack's emotional web. Warriors found their coordination slightly off. The land itself seemed to grieve. The first external blow landed at dawn. A messenger, allowed through the lockdown, delivered a sealed scroll from Alpha Alistair. It was not a declaration of war. It was something colder. A formal severance of all trade, diplomatic, and military treaties. Furthermore, Alistair announced he would be presenting his grievance to the Continental Alpha Council, demanding Thuron be stripped of his kingship for gross spiritual malfeasance and diplomatic fraud. Thuron's kingdom, built on strength and alliance, was being dismantled in hours, and Thuron, lying in his dark bed, faced the utter ruin of his life's work. He had wanted a politically perfect Luna. Now he had no Luna, no sight, no alliance, and a pack slowly sickenings. His only hope was the woman he had hidden and betrayed, who was now somewhere beneath his feet, trying to clean up a mess she had warned him about. The humiliation was complete, it was absolute, and it was only the beginning, for in his blindness, Thuron had made one final, catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed the threat was outside the gates, but the real coup was already brewing within his own council. Conspiracy was led by the most trusted voice in the room, Lysander, the High Elder who had performed the false ceremony. For decades, he had been the guardian of tradition, the solemn voice at every rite of passage. But tradition to Lysander meant purity of bloodline. He had watched with silent fury as Thuron modernized the pack, welcoming wolves of mixed heritage and prioritizing human-world commerce over ancient rites. The king's hidden affair with a low-born archivist was the final blasphemy. And the botched marking was the perfect crisis to exploit. While Thuron languished in blindness, Lysander convened a secret quorum of the council's oldest families. His argument was simple, ruthless, and effective. The curse proved the gods' displeasure. A king who could not see could not lead. A king whose true mate was a nobody would dilute their royal blood forever. Their solution was not to heal Thuron, but to replace him. Their candidate was Chaol, the loyal beater. They presented it to him not as treason, but as a painful necessity to save the pack from extinction. Chaol, a soldier taught to obey hierarchy, was torn apart, but as he watched the mystical sickness spread and heard the threats from Silver Fang, the Elder's poison began to work. They framed it as his duty. Meanwhile, deep in the earth, Ilara hit a wall. The purification sigils were a temporary fix. The corruption in the Li line was regenerative, feeding directly from the source, Thuron's broken bond. To truly cleanse it, she needed a component thought to be mythical, the tears of the first Luna. According to the oldest scroll, it was not literal tears, but a crystalline residue formed in sacred caves where true Luna's power had once manifested. The closest recorded site was in the contested mountains between Obsidian and Silver Fang territories. Venturing there alone was suicide. But staying meant the pack would slowly die. She made her choice. Using hidden tunnels known only from her maps, Ilara emerged outside the fortress walls under the cover of a moonless night. She was now a true rogue. Back in the throne room, now a makeshift council chamber, the coup moved into its final phase. Lysander addressed a gathering of pack nobles, masterfully weaving truth and lies. Our king is afflicted by a curse of his own making. His judgment led us to the brink of war. His attachment compromises our very essence. We must act to preserve Obsidian Mountain. A vote was called for a temporary regency, with Chaol as regent and Lysander leading the Council of Elders. It was presented as a merciful way to allow Thuron to heal without the burden of rule. The vote passed. Thuron, in his chambers, felt the shift in the pack bond like a sudden chill. The psychic tapestry that connected him to his wolves thinned, fraying at the edges where loyalty was being severed. He called for Chaol. When his beater entered, the scent of guilt and anxiety was overwhelming. "What have they done, Chaol?" Thuron asked, his sightless eyes staring past him. Chaol's voice was thick with conflict. "A regency, my king, for the good of the pack, until you are well." Thuron laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "I will never be well unless she returns, and you have just made sure she never will." At that moment, a scout burst in, ignoring protocol. "My king, regent." The Silver Fang pack, they're mobilizing warriors along the western ridge. Our sentries report at least 200 shifted wolves. Lysander, who had followed Chaol, seized the moment. "You see, the weakness he projects invites attack. Chaol, you must meet them with full force. Show them our resolve is unbroken." This was the trap. Lysander had been in clandestine contact with Alastair of Silver Fang. The promise was simple: keep Thuron's forces busy in a border skirmish, and once Obsidian was weakened and distracted, Lysander's faction would deliver the blinded king to them as a prisoner, along with territorial concessions. In return, Silver Fang would legitimize Lysander's new regime. Chaol, believing he was defending the pack, gave the order to mobilize. Thuron, powerless on his bed, could only listen as his pack marched toward a war built on a lie. Ilara, however, was already behind enemy lines. Using her knowledge of forgotten paths, she navigated the treacherous mountains. She found the sacred cave, its entrance hidden by a waterfall. Inside, the air hummed with residual power, and there, growing like crystallized frost on the wall, were the tears. But she was not alone. A Silver Fang patrol, alerted by her crossing, had tracked her. As she carefully harvested the fragile crystals, a voice echoed in the cavern. "The little archivist. Stealing our holy relics." It was Seraphina. The rejected bride had insisted on leading the patrol, hunger for vengeance burning in her eyes. This was no longer politics. This was personal. "I am not stealing," Ilara said, her voice steady. "I am trying to save the pack you once wanted to join from a magical sickness." The sickness of your mate asterisk, Seraphina spat. Let it rot, it will make our conquest easier, she signaled her warriors. Ilara was surrounded, the precious crystals clutched in her hand. Back at Obsidian, the first clash of wolves erupted on the border. It was brutal and confusing, but in the chaos, Lysander made his final move. He entered Thuron's chamber with 4 elders loyal to him. The pack is at war because of your failure, Thuron. For the kingdom's survival, you must publicly renounce the throne and your claim to that girl. Sign this decree, and you will be kept safe in comfortable exile. Thuron sensed the threat in the room. The scent of ambition and deceit was cloying. He knew then that signing his life away would not save him, it would just make his murder quieter. He had one card left to play. His blindness had honed his other senses to a razor's edge. He could hear the subtle shift of weight on the floorboards, smell the nervous sweat on the elder to his left. He remembered the layout of his room perfectly. Bring me the decree, Thuron said, his voice a weary surrender. And a pen. As Lysander leaned in, placing the parchment in his hand, Thuron moved. It was not the move of a sighted king, but of a wolf who had mapped the world by sound and smell. He grabbed Lysander's wrist, yanked him off balance, and in the same motion, swept the elder's legs out from under him. He snatched the ceremonial dagger from Lysander's belt and pressed it to the High Elder's throat before the others could react. The next person who moves, Thuron growled, watches this traitor's blood water the floor. The room froze. In the cave, Ilara faced Seraphina and her warriors. She had no combat training, but she had the old magic. She closed her fist around the tears of the first Luna. They were not just a component, they were a conduit. She focused on the bond, the true mate bond that still lived, frayed and pained, in her chest. She channeled all her will, all her love for the pack he had built, and all her fury at the betrayal he was suffering through the crystals. A pulse of pure, silvery light exploded from her hand. It didn't harm the wolves, but it flooded the cave with the overwhelming, undeniable aura of a asterisk true Luna's power. It was the scent of absolute, legitimizing authority. The Silver Fang warriors, raised on reverence for that exact ancient power, dropped to their knees in instinctive submission. Only Seraphina remained standing, shaking with rage and humiliation. Ilara looked at her, not with triumph but with pity. You wanted a crown, he offered you a contract. I never wanted either. I was given a bond. Now if you'll excuse me, my pack needs me. She walked past the kneeling warriors out of the cave and began the perilous journey back. She had the cure. But she was returning to a kingdom at war, led by a blinded king who had just taken a hostage and a beater marching into an ambush. The internal coup had been stalled, but the real war was just beginning. And the only person who could truly end it was the woman everyone had underestimated, carrying a crystal remedy in her hand and a revolution in her heart. Ilara returned to a fortress on a knife's edge. She didn't use the main gates. She slipped back through the catacombs, emerging into the lower archives just as dawn was breaking. The sickness in the air was now palpable, a static haze of despair. She went straight to the Lee Line Nexus. The black corruption had spread, choking the silvery light. With hands steady from a resolve forged in the sacred cave, she crushed the tears of the first Luna into a fine powder over the polluted pool. The effect was instantaneous and glorious. The crystals dissolved into a wave of iridescent light that swept through the tendrils of darkness, not pushing them back, but transforming them. The corrupted magic purified, flowing back into the lines clean and strong. Throughout the fortress, wolves felt it. A sudden lifting of the fog, a sharpening of senses, the return of the pack bond's warm hum. The land itself sighed in relief, but the source of the sickness, Thuron himself, remained afflicted. Above in the king's chamber, the standoff continued. Thuron held the dagger to Lysander's throat, the other elders trapped between fear of the king and fear of the conspirators outside the door. The balance of power was a whisper away from slaughter. Then the door opened. Ilara stood there, her simple grey dress stained with mud and mountain mist, her hair loose, her eyes blazing with an ancient certainty. Every head turned. The scent of jasmine, earth, and now, unmistakably, of purified lunar power filled the room. Release him, Thuron, she said, her voice quiet but absolute. Thuron's head jerked toward her voice. A tremor went through him. Ilara, they are traitors, they would sell the pack. I know, she replied, walking into the room. The elders shrunk back from her, not in fear of a servant, but in awe of the aura she now carried. But killing him in anger makes you a murderer, not a king, and we have a war to stop. She looked at the cowering elders. Your conspiracy ends now. You will go to the barracks and order the guards to stand down. You will send a runner to the border with my personal seal, calling for an immediate ceasefire and a parley. One elder sputtered. You have no authority to. Ilara's gaze cut him off. The land is healed, I healed it. What have any of you done but scheme in the dark? Do as I say, or face the pack's judgment when this is over. Something in her tone brooked no argument. They fled the room. Thuron slowly lowered the dagger, letting Lysander scramble away. He was trembling, his face turned toward where Ilara stood. The full weight of his blindness, his failure, crashed into him at her presence. You came back, he whispered, the words raw. I told you I would save the pack, she said, her voice softening only slightly. She approached him. He flinched as her fingers gently touched his face, tracing the skin around his milky eyes. The mate bond, so long suppressed, flared like a sun between them. The curse has taken root deep, she murmured, more to herself. The tears purified the external magic. To heal you, the marking must be completed, properly. Thuron's breath caught. Will you, after all I've done? Ilara didn't answer directly. First, we save the lives of your wolves, then we talk of marks. She took his hand. Come, we are going to the border. News of the healed Lee lines and the true Luna's return spread through the fortress like wildfire. By the time Ilara, guiding Thuron, emerged into the main courtyard, a crowd had gathered. They saw not a blind king, but their king, led by the woman whose power had just lifted the sickness from their souls. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Kale's war party was already engaged in skirmishes along the ridge. The Silver Fang wolves, fighting with the fury of the betrayed, were gaining ground. Kale, realizing too late the tactical trap, fought desperately. Just as a Silver Fang Alpha was about to deliver a killing blow, a sonic wave of power hit the battlefield. It was a pulse of pure, commanding energy that froze every wolf in place. On a cliff overlooking the conflict stood Ilara with Thuron beside her. She had tapped into the freshly healed Lee line, amplifying her innate lunar authority. Enough, her voice, magnified by magic, echoed off the mountains. This fight is built on lies. Look at your Alpha King, look at me. Every wolf, Obsidian and Silver Fang alike turned. They saw the truth not as words, but as scent and sense. The blinding curse was evident on Thuron. The profound, legitimizing power was radiant around Ilara. This was no political scandal. This was a spiritual reckoning. Alpha Alistair, leading the Silver Fang charge, shifted back to his human form, stunned. What trick is this? No trick, father, a voice called out. Seraphina emerged from the tree line, having followed Ilara back. Her face was a conflict of shame and dawning understanding. I witnessed her power in the sacred cave. She commands the old magic. He bears the curse for denying it. We are not fighting a weak king. We are attacking fate itself. The battlefield fell silent. Ilara spoke again, her tone shifting from command to diplomacy. Alpha Alistair, your grievance was valid. You were insulted and deceived by the treachery of our own High Elder Lysander, who conspired to sacrifice our king to you for power. The one who wronged you is in our custody. This war serves only his schemes. Alistair, a traditionalist to his core, was utterly disarmed by the display of authentic lunar power, something his own line had diminished over generations. The fight drained out of him. A ceasefire, he growled, and the traitor is handed over to face our justice as well as yours. Agreed, Thuron said, finding his kingly voice even in blindness, and we will renegotiate our treaties with the true lunar at the table. The crisis was over. The real work began. In the days that followed, a great tribunal was held in the Obsidian Great Hall. Lysander and his conspiring elders were stripped of their ranks and titles. By joint decree of Thuron and Alistair, they were exiled to the barren northern wastes, their pack marks removed. They would live as true rogues. Kale, for his part in the regency, was stripped of his beta rank, but allowed to remain as a senior warrior, his loyalty ultimately to the pack saving him from worse. The truth of the conspiracy unraveled completely, absolving Thuron of the worst accusations of deliberate fraud. The Continental Alpha Council, presented with the facts, ratified the actions and recognized Ilara's status. But the central, personal wound remained. In the quiet of the royal chambers, Thuron and Ilara finally faced each other. The kingdom is stable, Thuron said. The alliances are mending. Because of you, I have nothing left to offer you but myself, and I am broken. Ilara studied him. The arrogant king was gone. In his place was a humbled, powerful man waiting for a verdict he knew he deserved. The blindness, she said, do you see it as a punishment or a consequence? Thuron was silent for a long moment. A consequence. I chose not to see what was real. Now I cannot. It is fitting. And if your sight returned, she asked, would you see differently? I don't need sight to know what I threw away, he said, his voice thick. I feel it every second you're in the room. Ilara nodded. Then she did something that shocked him. She reached for the ceremonial dagger he had used to hold Lysander, the dagger used in markings. She pricked her own thumb, letting a drop of her blood well up, infused with the power of the tears and her own lunar essence. The curse corrupted the channel, she said. My blood, purified, can remake it, but the bond must be sealed, truly sealed. She stepped close, her scent enveloping him. This is not me accepting your earlier rejection, Thuron. This is a new choice, my choice. Do you accept me? Not as a secret, but as your queen, your equal, and your mate in the light for all to see. Thuron sank to his knees before her, a king brought low not by force, but by truth. I accept. I pledge myself to you, Ilara, my sight, my kingdom, my life. It is all yours if you will have it. Ilara placed her bleeding thumb against his lips. Then drink and see. As her blood touched his tongue, the magic ignited. Not the violent backlash of the false marking, but a rushing, healing flood of golden light. The milky whiteness in Thuron's eyes swirled like mist in a sudden wind, then cleared. He blinked, and he saw her face, fierce and beautiful and full of a love that had demanded he become worthy of it. The bond slammed into place, whole, perfect and glorious, healing the last of the corruption within him. He could see, but the final surprising detail was this: his sight was forever changed. Where he once saw only political landscapes and strategic assets, he now perceived the magical ley lines glowing beneath the land, the auras of his pack members, the shimmering truth of bonds and intentions. The curse had been transformed into a gift. He saw the world and his queen with perfect, magical clarity. He stood, pulling her into his arms, finally seeing the tears on her cheeks she had never shed in the crowd. My Luna, he breathed. My queen. Together they walked onto the balcony overlooking the healed kingdom. The pack below looked up and saw them, not a king and a servant, but a king and a queen, bound by a power that had nearly destroyed them, but had ultimately forged something unbreakable. The wrong choice had led to blindness, but the right choice, made in humility and truth, led to a vision more profound than any they could have imagined. So what is the true cost of a crown? For Thuron Blackwood, the price was his sight, his pride, and nearly his entire kingdom. He learned that the most dangerous blindness is not of the eyes, but of the heart. And in the end, his punishment became his redemption, transforming him from a king who ruled by calculation into a seer who understood the very magic of his land. For Ilara, the cost was silence. It was the agonizing choice to let destiny unfold, to allow the consequences of a bad decision to land with full force, even on the man she loved. Her power was not in interrupting the mistake, but in being prepared to rebuild from the ruins. Their story forces us to ask a difficult question. When faced with a choice between what is expected and what is true, between political convenience and sacred destiny, which would you choose? And if you chose wrong, would you have the strength, like Ilara, to not say a word, to let the universe deliver its own justice? This is the ultimate lesson of the fated mate bond. It doesn't just find you, it tests you. It breaks you open to see what you're really made of. Thuron and Ilara's reign became legendary not because it was perfect, but because it was forged in the fire of a catastrophic mistake and tempered by the humility required to fix it. They ruled for decades, their bond unshakable, their kingdom thriving because they now saw with the same eyes. The tale of the Alpha King who went blind and the quiet archivist who saved him is more than a supernatural romance. It's a map of consequence, a reminder that every choice, especially the ones made from a place of fear or arrogance, ripples out with magical force. And sometimes, the only way to truly see the path forward is to first be plunged into absolute darkness. If you were captivated by this journey of devastating consequences and breathtaking redemption, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a tale where true power comes from humility. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the stories that remind us of the magic in our own choices. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done in Ilara's place? Would you have spoken up, or would you have trusted the magic to deliver justice? Thank you for watching. Until next time.